The total market globally for storing value into the future is about $900 trillion. Maybe a little closer to a quadrillion at this point, but 900 trillion. Even at $90,000, Bitcoin still represents less than 1/4 of 1% of that market. Compare that to things like bonds, which represent a third of that market. Real estate, which represents a third of that market. Cash, which we all know is a melting ice cube, represents over $120 trillion. So even though Bitcoin has had these astonishing returns and is in the middle of this run, it is still incredibly early. The best day to buy Bitcoin was yesterday. The second best day is right now.
Question I've got for you that's an interesting one. Do you believe in the 4-year cycle? Okay, so we're here in person. I've got a very special guest.
Finally!
I know, right? How long has it been? I think I've known you over nearly a year now.
It's wild about Bitcoin. You know people for, first of all, you always feel like you've known people for longer than you have, right? Because, a Bitcoin year is like a dog year.
Yes.
And then you meet people for the first time and you feel like you've met them a bunch of times, even though you haven't. That's the crazy thing about Bitcoin.
It really is. And I think it's a Bitcoin specific thing.
Yes.
Because I only notice that when I go to different Bitcoin conferences and meet other Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
There has to be something about having shared values and shared passions in life. Speaking about, things we're sharing a country of El Salvador right now.
Yep.
How many times have you been and what's your first kind of impressions of the place this time?
So this is my second trip. I was here last year for the Adopting Conference and for the Unconference. And I'll tell you what I've noticed this trip so far is people seem a little bit calmer, right? The conversation's a little more hopeful. To a person, as I've asked them, hey, how are things going? What do you think? To a person, they've talked about how much safer they feel, how much more secure they feel, and how much more confident they feel. They also acknowledge there's a lot of work still to be done, but they're eager for that work, right? They believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today, and that's exciting to see.
The tone has certainly changed.
Yes.
Each time I come back, I notice a very noticeable difference. It's very interesting watching how things are changing here in El Salvador. Maybe we might jump into a spicy question. El Salvador was, the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. If you had to throw a dart at a dartboard, are there any other countries around the world who you think might just be most incentivized to adopt Bitcoin and maybe get off this dollar standard and adopt a more neutral global reserve currency like Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's hard to pick out a specific country, but I think, like you said, it's just like no man is greater than his incentives, neither is any country, and I think it probably makes sense for a country that is energy rich and whose economy is energy centered to take that step, right? So whether that's Russia or one of the Emirates or a country where they've already got the infrastructure in order to access and to retrieve and to develop energy resources. And Bitcoin is the best tool available to monetize those resources. So why wouldn't you leverage the infrastructure you already have in order to maximize the productivity and the profitability of those resources? Now, outside of that, maybe a country that has either an individual or a very, very small group of people that can eliminate any sort of the bureaucratic steps in order to do something like that. So whether it's a kingdom like Bhutan or something like that, but I really think it's probably going to be an energy-rich country. Maybe it'll be the US. That would be my dream come true.
Yeah, yours and mine too. I want, the last country that has some sort of semblance of freedom left in it to adopt freedom money. But so the Emirates countries, those are ones like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of those Middle Eastern
the
guys.
UAE, exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors circulating about those countries recently.
Yes.
I think Max Kaiser was recently talking about, Qatar and Saudi Arabia wanting to buy a lot of Bitcoin.
Absolutely. And David Bailey was hinting a few days ago that, there is, a pretty, what sounds like a pretty meaningful country in terms of their wealth, making purchases and accumulating Bitcoin. So who knows? The big conference going on in the Emirates, the MENA conference, not too far from now. Seems like that would be an interesting place to drop a big announcement like that if that was happening. So we'll see. Interesting times.
Great point, because it was at the biggest Bitcoin conference in America when Bukele originally announced he was going to make Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that conference in the MENA region is next month as well, so it's not too far away.
It's coming right up.
Okay. Speaking about things that are coming right up, there's been a lot of adoption of Bitcoin in the corporate space.
Yes.
So we have 58,000 public companies. I believe the number is there's somewhere around 130 of those now have Bitcoin on the balance sheet. That was obviously, that's obviously occurred after MicroStrategy is 40x its market cap in the past 4 years.
Yeah.
With like just buying Bitcoin, which is pretty crazy to think about.
It's wild.
If there was a company who you could force to buy Bitcoin, maybe that's just because you think it would be good for them from an economic standpoint, or maybe for another reason, is there a company that you think would be maybe most suited, or you think you'd like them to buy Bitcoin specifically?
Right. Well, if I could force a company to do it, because it would be kind of fun, it would probably be Euro Pacific Capital. And that's because that's Peter Schiff's company.
That's a great point.
So that would be fun.
Yeah.
But I would say if there was one company that I think it would make the biggest splash in terms of being really wake a lot of people up, it would probably be Berkshire Hathaway. And I mean, Apple, of course, those are all great. But I think if a company like Berkshire, because of their history, because of the position that some of their leadership has had about Bitcoin over the years, if they were to reverse course, if they were to acknowledge Bitcoin as an asset that should be on their balance sheet, I think that would change the most minds across the corporate space. So that would be, to me, the most interesting one if they were to do it, because it would be a big surprise.
Oh yeah, that would change a lot of minds.
Yeah.
Buffett and Munger historically haven't been the most Bitcoin friendly.
Correct, which is why I think it would raise the most eyebrows and probably change the most minds.
That's a great answer. The two answers I was not expecting at all. Speaking of Peter Schiff, what do you think he just doesn't understand about Bitcoin? Because he understands the problem. Don't get me wrong. I agree with 99% of Peter Schiff's analysis and breakdown of what's wrong with the US economy and the global economy in particular. But what is there about Bitcoin that you think he doesn't get?
This might be a controversial answer, but I think nothing. I actually don't think there's anything that he doesn't get about Bitcoin. Back to incentives. Well, what are Peter's incentives? Well, his incentives are to build his business, which still relies heavily on advising clients about and providing them with access to multiple asset classes. Yes. And so it's not in his interest to say, oh, well, now just go get some Bitcoin. Right. It's in his interest to expand his brand, to grow his audience by being a Bitcoin critic, right? So why not be the anti-Bitcoin guy? And who knows, maybe in the meantime, maybe you got 5,000 Bitcoin on the side somewhere nobody knows about. He could have the best of both worlds. So I actually don't think there's anything that he doesn't get. I think there's some incentives there that maybe we don't see because, like you said, he's a smart guy and he definitely understands the problem. So maybe he's just crazy like a fox.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about Peter Schiff. It's his arguments against Bitcoin have never really made sense to me. And then you kind of layer in the extra context of his son just coming out with some really interesting takes about not only Bitcoin, but also artificial intelligence. It makes you think that maybe there's a little bit more going on in the Schiff family than meets the eye.
Yeah, he's a sharp guy. So let's hope. That's what I hope.
Yeah, and his son looks incredibly smart as well. So,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So speaking about things that are sharp, I want to get to some really spicy questions at the end of the interview.
All right.
I'm going to park those for a moment. I want to ask you a little bit more about what you're doing with Rhino.
Okay.
Because again, like I said, speaking of sharp, you created what we think is, the all-in-one Bitcoin super application. What are the biggest developments you've got coming down the line for Rhino? And maybe first, just tell us a little bit about why you built Rhino and, why now in 2024.
Sure. Well, you said a little bit of it yourself just a moment ago. We built it so that clients would have the ability to grow and take each step of their Bitcoin journey and do that with one company where they could build trust, and they could build loyalty, and they could build confidence over time. As far as what we have coming up, we We have a lot. So first of all, on the remittance side, we expect to expand the remittance services that we currently have to potentially dozens of additional countries in 2025. So we're gonna ramp that up by probably an order of magnitude over where we started this year.
Did you say dozens?
Dozens.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and we're also looking to bring 3 additional primary services onto the platform, and that would be lending, that would be retirement services, and that would be bill payment. So we're going to really expand the suite of services to become more complete than it is currently. We're also looking to expand the custody options that we make available to our clients so that they have different ways that they can hold their Bitcoin as they grow in their journey, and as their wealth grows, the custody needs change. We want to be there for them as those needs change. And we're also looking to potentially move beyond the US and expand internationally. So basically, it's more services for more people and more places.
Yeah. It's a lot of new places too, dozens. I had to take a double take when you said that, but
that's the goal.
I think the lending, the borrowing feature, like that, the timing of that is nearly perfect. The price of Bitcoin right now at the time of recording is like $90,000.
Yeah.
A lot of people expect it to go a lot higher in the next 12 months. It's, typically what Bitcoin does in these kind of 4-year cycles. And maybe a question I've got for you that's an interesting one. Do you believe in the 4-year cycle?
I do, because until it stops happening, I don't know why you wouldn't believe in it. Generally, if we're thinking about human psychology, I mean, this is the way people behave, right? We are fearful, and then there is a big change, and there is a breakout, and then people get excited. Maybe sometimes they get overly excited. We get out over our skis a little bit, and then we have to, pay a little bit more tuition in order to learn really how this asset works. So given that we're now about to be 4 for 4 with these cycles, I certainly don't know how to tell the future, and I'm not an expert in this area. But until that cycle theory, until it doesn't manifest, then I think we have to believe there's going to be at least some version of that cycle. Maybe it'll be muted as the asset grows in terms of its market cap. That would be normal. But the cycle, I believe, will stay intact for a while.
Now, the second, maybe more controversial part of that question is there's a little bit of a debate going on between different factions in the Bitcoin community. Some people believe the halving is, a bigger driver of these 4-year cycles, that supply shock that happens every 4 years. Other people think the halving is less important, and we're much more tied to the liquidity cycles in macro that are more tied to these 4-year political cycles in the US in particular. Where do you sit in that kind of debate? Do you think one is more important than the other?
That's an interesting question, and that's probably one that, I wish someone like, Lynn Alden or Preston Pitch were sitting here to answer that question, because they would probably give a much more well-informed answer. I think that there is likely a transition that is happening. The answer to that is there's probably a spectrum, and we're in a transition phase on that spectrum. When we were talking about 2 or 3 halvings ago, then I do think that it was that the issuance itself was a major driver in how that cycle played out. I think that now we're probably shifting to a period of time where the issuance is not so much of a driver. Now, the way that miners and what they have to do with regard to maintaining their solvency during that supply shock is still a factor, but I think it is more now becoming about liquidity, about larger trends, because it truly now is a more global asset.
Yes.
Even 2 cycles ago, it really was still a very niche asset, both in terms of its market cap and in terms of its ownership. Now, I think that we're shifting to a place where much bigger trends are impacting it more significantly than the issuance, because it is so much smaller than it was in previous cycles.
It's a great answer. Even as you were saying it really got me thinking. Obviously, in 2012, the halving was such an impactful event for Bitcoin. There was less Bitcoin. There's only 10.5 million Bitcoin mined in those first 3.5 years. And, when the block rewards cut from 50 to 25, that's a big supply shock. So yeah, a great answer anyway. Now, maybe another little bit more of a difficult question. We don't like easy questions here. I don't know if you guys have noticed.
Keeping me on my toes.
Yeah. We like asking the more difficult questions. So one of those would be, what do you think has the potential to be one of the bigger surprises in the Bitcoin space over the next, say, 12 months, or even we'll give you a 5-year or a 10-year time frame?
Well, I'll have to think about that. Those are probably very different answers for those time frames. But I think for 2025, at least, for the next 12 months, I think the biggest surprise might be that we still have a lot of work to do. Because of especially recent events that have happened in the political arena, and because we're getting to the point in the cycle where we get to reap the rewards of our patience through the bear market.
Yes.
There's probably a tendency to become a little overly optimistic and say, "Yep, we've won. We're good. Bitcoin's all set. Now I can just sit back and drink my Mai Tais and life is great." And I think what we're going to find is that yes, maybe we've overcome some of the challenges that faced the space in previous years. Maybe fewer people now are thinking, oh, it's just for criminals, or the government's going to ban it, or some of the FUD that we've maybe successfully pushed back. But when you solve one challenge, what all that really means is you now qualify to take on an even bigger challenge.
Yes.
And so now we have to start thinking about those things. So whether it's mining pool centralization or contentious soft forks or those kinds of things, we have to remember that if we want this to be money for the next millennia, that we have to stay vigilant and that we have to stay committed to continuing to make sure that it is protected and that people are getting accurate information so they can make good decisions about how to preserve their wealth.
You mentioned a couple of very interesting potential threats there to Bitcoin, very offhandishly. Is there one that you worry the most about? A potential threat to Bitcoin? Is it, are you worried about ETF centralization, for example?
Well, I worry about centralization in general, regardless of its source. I think that if we're saying, what are the real cornerstones, the things that need to stay intact for Bitcoin to be able to continue on this path that it's on, it's probably the 21 million hard cap and decentralization, which traditionally we just think of decentralization in terms of, people are running nodes all over the world and we all agree on the status of the ledger. And as long as that stays decentralized, that's great. But I think things like mining pool centralization in particular, I think is a more immediate threat. I think the ETF centralization is probably less of a threat unless we're talking about an asset seizure a la 6102. But it's something that we absolutely should keep an eye on. And as good as the ETFs are, I think as a, like Corey from Swan would say, a top of funnel marketing channel.
Yes.
I agree with that statement. And as much as they're good in that sense, it's critical that, again, we stay vigilant. And if somebody takes that as a first step because it's easy, it's familiar, that's wonderful. But we have to continue to educate that person and we have to help them to understand what are the other aspects of Bitcoin that you're not getting from that decision that you should learn more about so that you can take full advantage of what Bitcoin has to offer you and your family.
Also a great answer. I do like to keep an eye on the whole mining pool centralization thing. I think it's something that isn't, not enough people are paying attention to. Now, something that a lot of people are paying attention to is the price of Bitcoin. We mentioned it earlier.
Sure.
It's at $90,000 a coin. And there could be some new people watching thinking, I'm too late to Bitcoin. I'm never going to have as much Bitcoin as everybody tells me I need. There's some really prominent names in the space like British Hodl, who says, get to 1 Bitcoin. Do everything you can to get to 1 Bitcoin. Now, obviously, some other people say that, hey, maybe you can get away with 0.1 Bitcoin. Maybe that amount of Bitcoin could be enough for you to retire on in the future. Yeah. Because obviously this whole idea, a lot of people are thinking about it because all of a sudden it doesn't mean so much to be a millionaire anymore. Like if I'm a millionaire in Australia, I can't afford the average size home in Sydney.
Right.
And so all of a sudden you have to be a billionaire to really, a billionaire is kind of that new number that everybody's trying to reach. In the Bitcoin space, is there a number in your mind, that you kind of think of, hey, that would be a good stacking goal that the everyday person can get? Is it, a full Bitcoin? Do you think 0.1 Bitcoin's a good start? Obviously, your app lets people buy fractions of a Bitcoin all day, every day. So I'm really interested. Have you kind of thought about this debate that's kind of going on in the Bitcoin space right now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think it's actually a question that's, in a way, it's much bigger than Bitcoin itself, because what is wealth, right? And what is sort of financial independence is a very, very personal answer for each individual. It depends on their lifestyle, it depends on their life stage, it depends on their location where they live. It depends on a lot of things, and so I think that one of the things that folks can do is they can think about, okay, well, how long do I have to save in this asset? What do I want to then get from that asset at a time where I want to be maybe drawing on that wealth? And putting together a financial plan that includes Bitcoin as one of those strategies. And just like you forecast into the future, if I have this amount in equities or this amount in real estate, and this is what I believe it's going to grow, and then this is how that supports the goals that I have for myself and my family. And I think that is a good way to come up with, okay, well, what's your stacking goal? Because I might say one Bitcoin, it's like, that's amazing. And, somebody else might say, oh my gosh, if Michael Saylor only had one Bitcoin, he'd jump off the Empire State Building and slash his wrists on the way down, right? So it's really different for each individual. The most important thing is study it, understand what it can do for your family, and then do everything you can to save as much as you can for as long as you can, so that you can fully reap the benefits of this, really once in a millennia or maybe multi-millennia change in terms of a new asset class monetizing.
Now, I wanted to quickly interrupt today's interview to give a massive shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is a Bitcoin banking solution that combines traditional financial services with the power of Bitcoin. Created by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners, Rhino offers a range of different services. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin, you can withdraw straight to cold storage, and you can even pay other people using the Bitcoin Lightning Network. You can also purchase gift cards with sats at the click of a button, and you can even connect a multi-signature setup to Casa, all by using the Rhino application. Additionally, you can even send cash globally to your family and friends using Rhino, and soon you'll be able to pay bills, borrow money against your Bitcoin, and even save Bitcoin for your retirement, all in the one seamless application. You guys can visit rhinobitcoin.com to download Rhino today and experience the future of Bitcoin banking.
Again, another brilliant answer. It's all about perspective. Like Michael Saylor's a billionaire. For him, one Bitcoin is a tiny percent allocation of his net worth, 0.001% or whatever it would be. But like you say, someone in a different location or geography, one Bitcoin or 0.1 Bitcoin to someone in Nigeria or in Colombia or Argentina could be a significant amount of wealth.
That's right.
Great answer. I love that. Do you have any final comments or final thoughts for today's interview? Do you think there's something that most Bitcoiners are kind of really underestimating or should be paying more attention to?
Well, you alluded to it a little bit in the previous question, in that I think there are a lot of folks who have not yet gotten off zero, who have not yet taken that first step, and now they're feeling a little bit regretful about that. They're kicking themselves and they're saying, my son told me, my friend told me, my boss told me, my wife told me, whatever it was, and I missed it. It's too late. I'll just forget about it. And I would say to that person, you should take a second look. And here's why. When you think about the market that Bitcoin competes in, right? It is the market for storing value. One of the markets, the primary market it's competing in right now. So the question when you think about, well, should I invest in any asset is, well, what is the potential? What's the total addressable market? What's the TAM, right? Well, the total market globally for storing value into the future is about $900 trillion. Maybe a little closer to a quadrillion at this point, but 900 trillion. Even now, even at $90,000, Bitcoin still represents less than 1/4% of that market. Compare that to things like bonds, which represent 1/3 of that market. Real estate, which represents 1/3 of that market. Cash, which we all know is a melting ice cube, represents over $120 trillion. So even though Bitcoin has had these astonishing returns and is in the middle of this run, it is still incredibly early. So the best day to buy Bitcoin was yesterday. The second best day is right now.
And the best place to buy your Bitcoin
is, of course, at Rhino.
100%. Hector, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure to finally meet in person.
Absolutely.
You're a busy man. You are building what we think is the all-in-one Bitcoin super application. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for what you're building. And where can people find you online if they'd like to reach out and ask you any questions?
Yeah, they can reach me on most platforms, just my first name, last name. So Hector Alvero, LinkedIn, X, I'm on Noster, Hector at primal.net. So just, look around for it. So far, I haven't heard the name Hector too much in the space.
Very rare.
Look for it. And of course, obviously at Rhino. So, and of course, and at Me Premier Bitcoin as well.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Lou.